I'm privileged to be here this afternoon with two extraordinary executives who I have the privilege of calling colleagues and friends. Gail Horwood, who is the CMO for North America for the Kellogg Company, and Lilian Tomovich, who is the Chief Experience and Marketing Officer for MGM Resorts. And I can think of no two better people to have a conversation around how we are transforming the landscape of marketing, customer experience through the role that data and technology are playing. So why don't we start with you, Lily, because I love your title that you even have Chief Experience and Marketing Officer together, which really embodies so much of what we talk about, which is that now marketing isn't this thing over here where we drive advertising and messaging, and experience is somewhere distinctive. The customer expects it all to be connected. So I like to think of CMOs as being chief dot connectors, and your title reflects that. How do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Jen and I were talking earlier, and I said, when I started my career, marketing was this notion of it's a combination of art and science, and now I always say it's really art, science, and technology. And so for us, being in the entertainment business and sort of operating around the world, we've always done a really great job at delivering experiences in the physical space. It's too bad we're not an MGM property today, but if you're not staying here at Caesars, you're probably at one of ours. But the reality is that we know how to do that really well, but it's the next evolution, which is through all the digital channels. How do we sort of enable a better guest experience, kill the buzz kills, as we call it, and plus up the things that we want to do to deliver a great time while you're here or away and thinking about coming back to Las Vegas. And so for us, it's really about merging the physical and the digital together is what's imperative for us.
Great. And Gail, as you think about it, I know you're thinking very holistically about the entire journey for a customer. How are you going about that?
Yeah, the way I like to talk about it is marketers used to be focused on demand creation, and our sales organization used to be focused on demand fulfillment. And I really think it's our job to think holistically about that whole journey now. And so we do a lot to integrate, store back retailer thinking at the point of ideation. So communications is no longer in a silo. It's really reflective of the entire shopper experience, which is a pretty significant change at a CPG company.
Yeah, so how is that changing the way you work with your other colleagues in the C-suite? As we think about more data being infused into the equation, the world of a CMO, a CIO, a CTO, and the CFO in particular, it's changing. How are you building that trust and breaking down the silos?
Yeah, I mean, the way we've done it at Kellogg is to create a unified scorecard, a brand building scorecard, and we're all aligned to what the metrics are, and then we really focus on what we're doing about them as opposed to worrying about what, spinning the data or what report says what. We laugh because we used to spend a lot of time doing that. But now we really focus on what we're going to do about it, which is it's a significant change, and it's a change for the better. And so we're really aligned to that. And as part of our growth strategy, we're fortunate because we're investing in brand building, and brand building is considered a really important piece of our overall growth strategy. So that's been fantastic.
What about you, Lily? Are you forging new relationships with some of the other folks in the C-suite?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was saying, of course, we recently hired a chief digital officer who actually resides within marketing, but they really act, we like to say that they're sort of the bridge. The Digital Ventures group, as we've formed, is really sort of the bridge between traditional IT and traditional marketing. And so we have a very close working relationship with IT. And I know a lot of folks have asked, why did we decide to build sort of a separate entity called Digital Ventures? And we realized in our particular business, we were so laden with enterprise-wide systems that we can't work in an agile method and deliver pieces of technology for our consumers if we sort of have them embedded in traditional IT. So we made the decision to pull them out, build a Digital Ventures group that sits within my organization that are very focused on how do we enable technologies that deliver against traditional sort of bricks and mortar experiences in the digital space. And since we're not digitally native, that was a requirement for us to kind of be more agile and move quickly and leverage design thinking and sort of that new approach to guest experience.
Now, as you brought more of that technology into the equation, I'd imagine there's a lot of investment involved. It's a tough conversation to have with a CFO and with the rest of the C-suite to make the right kinds of investment in data and technology.
Yeah.
How do you make that business case and get people on board so that they see the short-term benefit, but also build for that longer term?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not easy. When we launched Digital Ventures, really, I guess, a year ago now, we had a substantial ask, obviously, for a lot of platforms that we wanted to invest in. And the reality is, as I was telling Janet a little earlier, there is a little bit of a leap of faith. And so you can model out as many ROIs as you want, which of course we did. You know, if we could drive X amount of incremental personalization through this platform, would it deliver X amount of revenue, which in turn turns to profit, and all those kind of things that we like to look at. But the reality is, it is a bit of leap of faith. And so what we've tried to do along the way is do some quick use cases and some quick wins so we could show progress along the way and then sort of unleash more budget. Because the reality is, to walk into a CFO today and say, I need $50 million for XYZ platform, and I'll get you something in 3 to 4 years from now, generally that's not going to fly. And so we've tried to sort of take off little bits and pieces of the budget, show results, show return, and then kind of ask for more. And so it's there's no utopia, there's no perfect answer, but as I said, for us, it's about showing some quick results with simple use cases and not waiting for this big bang, approach to results.
What about at Kellogg's? How are you looking at the short and the long-term ROI in that financial conversation?
We're absolutely doing what you describe. I think another aspect for CPG, a lot of our quote-unquote marketing technology was operated outside our walls in our agency ecosystem. And so we've spent a lot of time looking at the agency ecosystem and really understanding how we work together. There was a lot of duplication in that ecosystem. And so we don't necessarily have to bring everything in-house. And at Kellogg, that's not our perspective. We're not planning to build this endless stack because, for one thing, to your point, we can't finance it that way, and we have to incrementally build the business case. But a big piece of it has been looking at our agency and vendor ecosystem to make sure that we're leveraging the right tools and resources at the right time, and then building internally slowly. I mentioned, Janet and I were talking earlier, we've taken e-commerce as a use case where we want to make sure we're investing in the right technology to ensure that all of our marketing and brand building is the same on the e-commerce platforms at our retail. And so we've invested a little bit in digital asset management and other pieces so that we can seamlessly flow those assets. That's been a great first use case that's garnered a lot of attention. We're building from there. I think it's really critical, though, to look outside our walls as to where we're leveraging other pieces of the technology stack.
So you talk about the technology stack, and I think on some level it's daunting, right? Because there's so many different things that are out there, and you can try to build this extraordinary thing. But I know that you've taken a keen look at what are the use cases and making sure that you're not building a Ferrari before you're ready to drive it that fast, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say there's no shortage of marketing technology, and we don't need as much as I'm offered. Let's put it that way. So not a day goes by that somebody isn't trying to sell me a new tool that's going to solve all my marketing problems.
Wouldn't
and I think,
be amazing, though?
yeah, I mean, I'm actually an optimist, but it would be impossible to incorporate all this technology that's going to solve every marketing use case. So we've been really focused on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and really just getting the teams together. And it's been a big, a learning and a journey about what is it we really want to do, because when everything is possible, and in theory it's all possible, what is really going to drive our business? And there's been, some testing and learning. I mentioned e-commerce has been a really important use case for us, and also personalization at scale. So making sure we can deliver the right message, the right person at the right time, but enabling that in a cost-efficient way, because historically that's been a very expensive undertaking, again, for a company like ours that we don't have in-house content studio, et cetera. We rely on an external ecosystem of partners to create content.
So Lily, I know you've done a lot around hyper-personalization, in particular, making sure that you're really hyper-serving your guests at the MGM Resorts by using data and technology intelligently. Where are you on that journey?
Well, I was saying the top, because obviously we were born out of the casino business, but now we do so much more. And so the top 1% of our consumer base, it's exactly what you think. I mean, we really understand the top 1% of our customer base, and we've got hosts, and we have a one-to-one relationship, and we know your favorite food and your pillows and your wife's birthday and your son's age and where he's going to college. But it's how do we unlock that frozen middle, which is where we don't have a one-to-one relationship. And so how do we leverage the reaps of data that we have, because we are in so many businesses, people traditionally think of us as a hotel and casino company, but the reality is we're actually, at least at MGM Resorts, we're the #2 food and beverage company in the world. We're also the #3 entertainment company in the world. And so we have so much data that we need to coalesce and align. And of course, as I say to everybody, it sounds, this notion of personalization, it kind of drives me crazy because it makes it sound like it's so much easier than it is. And the reality is it's damn hard work, and we are not where we'd like to be. We're probably, to be honest, somewhere in the crawl stage because we have all the complexities that I'm sure all of you do have as well. Multiple systems, age systems, we grew out of acquisition, and it's complex. And like my friend here says, I get a call every day saying, well, we can make it simple. We'll develop a customer data platform for you, and we'll leverage your your enterprise data hub, and we'll have this all solved. No, you won't. It's very challenging. So we are very focused on it. We want to be able to drive personalization at scale, and eventually we'll get there, but it's a journey. And I think there's no finish line ever either.
Agreed. So I'm curious, because you have a lot of first-party data because you're transacting directly with your customers, so that loop is closed for you. And so being outcome-driven, it's very clear how it can do that. Yeah. Gail, in the world of CPG, it's a bit more challenging. How are you thinking about data-driven marketing and CRM in the context of the category in which you operate, where so much of the retail isn't owned by you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been on that journey at Kellogg for a number of years, 5+ years, and we've gotten smarter about how we're what is useful to the consumer, why they would ever want to give us their data, and why they would want us to have a personalized relationship with them. It's obviously very different use case, and it's really hard. I think one of the things I've been focused on is connecting the dots between all the different sources of data, so we really truly understand the consumer journey for our customer. And this isn't evolving. You're never done. You're never finished. It's that journey changes all the time. But doing things like integrating our call center data. We have a retail activation in New York City called Kellogg Cafe, and making sure that the consumer has the opportunity to opt into an experience if they choose. And all the promotions we do an enormous number of retail promotions, and making sure it's easy, frictionless, and seamless for a consumer to say, yeah, I'd like to hear from you again, or I'd like a follow-up, I'd like the recipe for the dish I had at the cafe. And we make that easy for them. But that's not an easy journey. It seems so straightforward, like, of course. But the systems, the different platforms, the way data is stored, privacy, all the rest, it's much more complicated than it should be, or that we're led to believe by all of our vendor partners that call on us.
The other thing, Janet, I would mention as well is one of the things that we're looking at as part of this, and I'd love to hear sort of what your team is doing, but just organizing the marketing organization for the future and understanding structure and how to leverage all these pieces of technology and who owns what piece of the systems, the customer, the data. That's kind of an evolution that I know myself and many other CMOs are looking at, is really what, the traditional structure that we've all had for years, which has been kind of, pretty simple to follow, isn't really the future of the organization today, as a matter of fact. And so understanding how do you enable marketing organization design and structure is really challenging as well.
Yeah, I mean, at Kellogg, one of the appeals to me about the role was this desire to do that. And I think the first step is actually saying we're going to break the silos in our own organization and enable that. And the way we've done that, and again, these are huge changes and small changes at the same time, but in my organization, I have all the consumer touch points. So I have retail shopper activation, I have media, I have packaging design, and I have brand PR. So those functions, typically live in many different organizations. And again, it's not that we didn't work together, and I would be kidding you. We were all collaborating, but it's different when you have a common goal and a common purpose, and you see that journey in the same way. The other big piece, which is an unlock, is measurement. So particularly with all the consumer touch points, they're measured in a lot of different ways. And one of the things we're evolving is, and again, we don't have the answers, but what we're doing is we're asking the questions about how would we think about measurement differently if this is the outcome we're trying to achieve. And we're questioning the way we've measured things in the past. So whether it's brand PR or VAP or what we do in the store, what is the most modern and relevant way to measure that, so that we can actually have the objective of reaching the consumer wherever he or she may be and moving that money around seamlessly. So it's both big steps and small steps to do that, but we're restructuring differently. So. and I'll let you know how it works in a year or two.
So I'm curious, in that landscape that you're describing, digital marketing in so many ways from a measurement standpoint is easiest, at least on the surface, although obviously some issues of the source of some of that measurement and where it comes from. But if you look at digital marketing, I think it's training us to focus on accountability, to focus on outcomes. And again, perception is more measurable than perhaps other traditional forms. So as you think about that, do you feel like we're gravitating as an industry and as the practitioners in marketing too far to the outcome-driven end of the spectrum and losing the top of the funnel metrics that are so critical to drive brand equity and awareness, and really create that flywheel between performance marketing and brand marketing that's so critical to drive it? I don't know who has a thought on that, Lily?
Well, I absolutely think that is so true. I think as marketers, we're seeing more pressure to deliver results and really focus on what we call performance marketing. The reality is, and I was talking about this earlier, we use the Adobe suite of products, and we actually did a bit of a test because we were getting pressure, of course, like all of us do, which is, can you cut your budget? Where can you cut? Different quarters may not be looking as positive as we had hoped. And the reality is people always want to cut from top line brand building because they don't see direct ROI. And so we actually did some experiments where we said, okay, what if we actually cut some brand building dollars? How does that actually impact ultimate conversion, click-through, and room bookings for us? And at the end of the day, as we all know as marketers, it absolutely impacts it. To your point, there is a flywheel. There is, not perfect, but there is a science there that tells you have to spend X amount on brand awareness, top of funnel, to actually drive that bottom line ROI and conversion and ultimate booking and obviously click-through. And so we try and use actual data to support when we have those conversations with our finance team, et cetera, which is if we take too much from here, it's going to impact this. And so that's really the only way to do it, is to prove it with results and data in terms of the type of impact it may or may not have.
Absolutely. And how are you keeping performance and brand marketing in balance, Gail?
I mean, I think one of the challenges for a business like ours is we don't always own the point of sale, so it's a lot more difficult. And I think we've gotten distracted by how measurable certain channels are, but what we've lost sight of is how they all work together.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to measure that. So we're really focused on trying to understand that for our business. And again, it's an evolution. I don't have that direct correlation because I don't have that direct transaction, but what we're seeing and what we're focused on is this interplay between the channels, which is why I'm excited, and I mentioned it in terms of our structure, is we can play around with what are we measuring and how, and run some tests around that. So we're at the very beginning of that journey because now we're all organized with the same sort of goal in mind, and at the end of the day, we can flex the measurement around that. Certain channels have more measurement that we need, and our teams get, I think, lost in the weeds about what's possible, and they lose sight of kind of what we're trying to drive at the top or at the bottom line, really, because they're busy micromanaging every lever, which is great, but also can be distracting.
Yeah, that's true.
When I think about data-driven marketing, what's interesting to me is, today we focus on data-driven marketing in the context of digital marketing. But we're on the cusp of so many other applications of what data can do for us if we build the right architecture and the right, as you point out, operating model and all the enablers that surround the data and the technology stack. To me, it starts with digital marketing. We then can get into the full end-to-end customer experience. Obviously, it impacts the way we buy media. Things that we would have traditionally called linear, are increasingly going to be addressable and have dynamic ad insertion, whether it's television or out of home. And then ultimately, we can go all the way through sort of our innovation agenda. Do you think your companies feel and embrace the full potential of getting underneath the hood of data and the value that can create for your company over the longer term?
I mean, I would say, yes, generally people do absolutely understand the power and value of data, but I don't think anybody really understands how much it can unleash, because I think there's still a lot of unknowns, and I think it probably can unleash a lot more than we have wrapped our arms around today, just because the world changes so quickly, and the unknown is the unknown today.
I mean, the plus and minus of the approach that we've both explained that we're taking, which is sort of this incremental, like try it and then build it, is that we do a lot of betas, and I like to say there's a lot of testing and not a lot of learning. That's not necessarily true, but it's hard to get scale with the tests. So one of the things we're looking at is when we do a beta, what is it we would ultimately like to do with the outcome of this? So one way or the other, if it's a positive outcome, where would we take this? How would we grow it? Because what ends up happening is, and I experienced this at another company, you just do a ton of beta testing, which is great, but then it never scales into anything. So you're in this constant testing mentality, but you're not actually getting to the next level. So I do think people appreciate it, but we're still not seeing the scale of what's possible.
And you can get caught up with analysis paralysis
Right.
as well and miss the big picture and the minutia of the testing.
It makes sense. So we're here at Adobe Summit, and I know when you came into the role 2 years ago, one of the things you did, Gail, was bring Adobe into the mix. Can you share a little bit just about how you were thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in CPG, and I explained that we outsource a lot of our marketing technology to our agency ecosystem. So we took a look at what is it we want to own, what is it we want to control, what is it we really want to incorporate into our workflow, and it was really important to us that that consumer journey, that consumer experience was part of it. I think the biggest challenge was not bringing in the technology, but really adoption and training both our own internal employees, but also our external agency partners about where those lines began and end, and we're still in the middle of that journey. I think the other piece is that we took a lot, or I took a look at who is it that's working in our agency ecosystem and how do we act as one team. So this idea that we're throwing things over the transom and activating marketing like, hey, that's your job. We're building more accountability into our agency ecosystem. So the technology is definitely a big piece of it, and installing it and making sure that it meets your expectations for now and the future. But it's also who's running these tools, who's using them, and how are they incorporated into other existing workflows in a way that, let's be honest, is both non-threatening but advantageous to both sides. I'm not somebody who believes we're going to insource all of marketing. I mean, I think our agency partners play an incredibly important role. And so really deciding, and that's different for every company and for every business. So, you know, we've taken a look at that and we're evolving that.
What about you, Lily, just the people side of all of this? Because in some ways the technology is, I won't call it the easy part, but it can be the easier part on some level. Getting the people that surround it to have the right skills, the right process flows, the right collaboration. Where are you finding that part of the challenge?
It's really interesting because I think there could be a whole session, I'm sure there is, going on right now in terms of recruitment of needed skill sets within the marketing organization. And we've sort of have been going through that with digital ventures. And it's interesting because all of a sudden you're this hotel, casino, entertainment company trying to attract talent that would normally be at Amazon, Tesla, Airbnb, et cetera. And so we're competing with the type of talent that we've never had to compete with before. We've never sort of looked into those areas to attract folks to come work at our organization. And so that's what we're doing today, which actually is interesting because it's had to change the entire philosophy of our sort of human capital approach and how we compensate individuals. And you really have to, I've been working really closely with our HR partners to say, this type of individual, a product manager, is very, very different than the product manager, 10 years ago that you wanted to pay X. And trying to explain to them the type of skill set and the demand on this skill set has been a really interesting education process for our compensation group. And I am actually happy to say that we've made headway in terms of them understanding the talent that I need today for tomorrow is very different than what we've had in the past. And as a result of that, we have to look at everything, including how we compensate these individuals.
Just staying on the people side for one more moment, what's interesting to me is some CMOs, and I think it's probably a little different in the CPG landscape, are taking on the employee engagement side of the equation as well, recognizing that is part of this, the spiritual part of aligning all the human touch points with all the digital touch points and the physical touch points. Yeah. How do you think about employee engagement relative to a CMO?
Well, it's interesting. When I first joined, I've been at MGM Resorts about 5 years, and one of my initial things that I did was actually build an MGM Resorts brand. And traditionally, we've been very focused on our individual resort brands, whether it's Bellagio or Mandalay Bay or Aria, et cetera. And so we didn't really have an MGM Resorts brand. And what we did, I partnered very closely with our CHRO, and we actually, what we called it is we built the brand from the inside out. And so we really spent time aligning culture and brand with our entire 78,000 employees. And it started from the top down. Our chairman, we literally went ballroom to ballroom across the world, training our employees on the brand and the culture that we wanted to build over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And so from a marketing perspective, aligning brand with culture was really, really important to me, and I think must be going forward as well for that employee engagement piece. Exactly what you said.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, in my role, I'm responsible for both marketing competency and leadership competencies amongst the marketers, and at Kellogg, we've taken the opportunity to take a look at that and revise those in the past year. So we're really training people on not only new what and new how at the same time, and they're related, right? If you're in an environment, and I had an opportunity last night to mentor some college students, and I said the most important thing you can do, and it sounds so obvious, is to continuously learn. When I started my career, I didn't have computers at college. I was a liberal arts major, an art history major. And the fact that this world has become so digital, so technical, there's not a day that goes by, I'm sure it's the case for you, where I have to learn something. I have to question how I'm doing things and how I could do it differently. And that's just a steady state. And I think, at large companies, it had become true that, what got us there isn't going to get us where we need to be in the future. And so we really need to instill this mindset of continuous learning, agility, the ability to change gears. And that's not historically how big companies have been set up. So it's as much about those competencies. Yeah. So I really take an active role in, mentoring and providing that support system, because it's hard. It's hard for everyone. It's hard for me. It's hard for anybody.
Sure. So I'd love for folks to start thinking of questions. I'm going to ask another question, but I want to open it up to the audience. When you think about that digital technical mindset and what it takes to thrive in a modern marketing world, and to me that's not about digital marketing, it's marketing in a digital enabled world, right? Because it touches everything. What are some of the things that you think are instrumental in helping companies at scale, at the enterprise level, all the way through the ranks, really embody that digital modern mindset?
I mentioned our brand building scorecard, and one of the things we did was centralize performance data so that we could all look at it together. We have a physical and virtual space we call the Cube. A lot of companies have this, but for the first time, we're all reviewing performance data at the same time, as opposed to I'm reviewing it, then I'm passing along what I think to somebody else, It aids agility. It's frequency. The ability to look at data all the time is a blessing and a curse, and really teaching the organization what's important at any given time. So that kind of communal viewing of data, that data storytelling has been really a big driver of us moving into a more modern kind of agile approach to marketing.
Yeah, I think that's great. I love the word that you use, which is teaching. And so what we've tried to do is bring in, as I said, some of this new, fresh talent and really teach the organization. What does it mean to be agile? What does it mean to use, design thinking? What does it mean to start thinking about use cases and delivering sort of quick iterations of the mobile app? And we talked about 3-4 years ago, we would update, we do a release every 6 months on our mobile app. And so bring in fresh thinking. How do we start doing releases every 2 weeks, et cetera? And so it's really about teaching the rest of the organization, bringing in a few thought leaders who can sort of, show the rest of the organization, how it can be done. I think is important, but it's hard too, right? Because these are big, established global brands that have been operating a certain way and, frankly, quite successful at it for a long time. And so, trying to move this kind of elephant is not always the easiest, but.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in rolling up sleeves and sort of doing the work, and I think it's demystifying for people to understand how it gets done. And so in the past, long ago, you would send work to somebody else to do, and it would be their job to figure out how it happens. And I think it's increasingly important for marketers or anybody in a big organization to have the basics and like, how is this actually going to happen, so they can make the right decisions and guide their teams in the right way. And that's a change, but it's happening.
I agree. I think the strategic, the analytical, the operational, the tactical, they're all fusing together in a way they never have before, so you can't afford to throw the baton and play the relay race quite like before. Yeah. So why don't we just see if there are any, I can keep going all day, but I'm sure there's been questions out there. Go ahead.
You touched on the issue of change management, but I'd be curious to know what some of those pain points were, and if you had it to do over again, how would you manage it? It seems that converting an organization that succeeded despite itself oftentimes is one of the harder tasks that we face.
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Change management, so it's interesting. I'll be honest, just the notion of change management in a project management office was new for MGM Resorts. That didn't even exist when I joined the company 5 years ago. So as we started through this whole transformation process, around guest data and technology, we actually implemented a change management office and a PMO office to sort of help us through that. And it really, it's all the things that we know, but it's so challenging to do, which is explain the why and how does this impact the team and what does this mean for the business, and how spending a lot of time just with individuals in communications. So all kinds of communications coming out of the change management office, and spending actually time with divisions and group, explaining to them the why. Why are we doing this, and how does this impact you, and how does it impact the business? So, without spending a lot of time, I would say communications as part of that is number one. And sometimes we were great at it, and sometimes we weren't. And the times we weren't, you see the trickle-down effect throughout the entire organization. So, it's I always say to people, there's no utopia, there's no perfect answer, but starting with communication and really spending time with your team members is most important.
Building on what you said, I couldn't agree more. I used to say big companies prioritize change over change management, and really, honestly, the case for change is kind of clear at this point, but moving a big organization requires a change management office, PMO, a constant, communications is critical. Having your communications partner as part of it. Mm-hmm. And the simple from and to slide it sounds so basic. Everybody wants to understand, why are we doing this? What are we moving away from, and what are we moving to? And we really include that in every kind of conversation.
I love that. We're huge on the from to slides. I mean, if you have a deck that doesn't have a from to, people are lost.
Yeah. That's usually the second slide in the deck. Like, here's the project, and here's where we're headed.
Yeah, no, it's a great point.
Yeah.
Hi, Lily. You made a quote earlier that I had to write down, that personalization is damn hard work. I love it. So when you look at personalization, we're dealing with a lot of walled gardens like Google, like Facebook. Do you see your spend trending up with these walled gardens, or down, considering that your personalization with them will have to be different than it is from everyone else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you're going to see a change with the walled gardens, the Googles and those folks. I sit on the board of the ANA, and we speak to them frequently. I think they're going to have to eventually probably change their approach, because I think of all of us sitting in the room, and especially folks like Kellogg and some of the other packaged goods, I mean, they're monsters in terms of the spend they push through folks like Google. And so I think you're eventually going to see that they're going to have enough pressure that they're going to have to change their approach. But to answer your question, generally speaking, we haven't sort of spent less or spent more. We sort of been steady state over the last couple years. But I think if we need, as advertisers and spenders, to put more pressure on these folks with their walled gardens. I don't think that business model is sustainable for them long term if we all sort of, raise our hands and squawk. And as I said, I know the ANA is very focused on pushing on that.
Thank you. Great. Another question? Got one over there.
Sticking with the personalization theme, one of the pushbacks that we often get when we're talking about personalization is the creep factor, and how getting way too personalized. Is that something that you are concerned about as you're going along your journey, trying to improve your personalization efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us generally, we've been sort of able to stay away from that, because when you think about the business we're in the fun business. As I always say, it's very clear we say every day is Saturday at MGM Resorts, because we're dealing with people who generally are coming to one of our resorts because they want to have a good time. And so when we talk about hyper-personalization, it's potentially talking to them about their favorite bottle of wine, or the next restaurant they may want to go to, or did they know Lady Gaga was at Park Theater or at T-Mobile Arena, which we own as well. We can sort of serve up all the talent that's going there. So people generally are okay with it because it's good news stuff. It's fun stuff. It's not, well, I know you're on this prescription, and what about this? It's like, well, wait a minute. now you really know too much about me. But this is kind of, do you want this concert, or do you want steak tonight? We sort of get away with it, I guess is what I'm trying to say, a little bit easier than maybe some other industries. But it's a great question. I haven't thought about that until you asked me that.
Go ahead, please. Here in the front. I think we go.
So, back on hyper-personalization, right? So you've mentioned that MGM has been able to focus on the 1%. And I was very curious, how did you arrive at 1%, and what is that, and how does that translate to revenue? What percentage of revenue does it impact for MGM?
It's really simple for us. The top 1% of our customers, which is a combination of both casino and non-casino, but predominantly casino, is 46% of our revenues. So, yeah. So, you know, all those stories you hear of the big whales, there's a reason. Usually when I speak, I tell you guys some secrets about, you know, MGM Grand, and actually most hotels that we own. There's sort of secret areas where these folks stay. We call them the mansions. At MGM, we have 23 mansions. They range from 5,000 to 12,000 square feet. None of you would know where it is. It's a secluded area, but that's a perfect example of where the whales live, and they have butler service. And, you know, and we cater to them. We completely, you know, I see some MGMers in here. That's why we focus on them. It's as simple as that. They drive 46% of our revenues. So we want to know everything about them.
I loved where you started to go with organizationally, how you're thinking about the future. I'd be really curious for both of you, given your businesses are so different. Like, how are you organized today, and what are your early thoughts?
I was going to ask her that after the session.
You know, as I said, we've made some changes in the last 2 years that were part of the reason I was, you know, among other things, drawn to Kellogg was the case for change was there. As I said, in marketing, we've organized all the consumer touch points under my team. So what, you know, brand PR, packaging design, CRM, the call center, retail activation. So we can really look at that end-to-end consumer journey and make decisions across it. It's impacted how we create assets, content, which media partners we use, et cetera. And it's created some accelerated learning, because at retail now, a lot of our retail partners are becoming media companies, if you wouldn't say they are already. So whether it's Amazon or Walmart, I mean, they've all been in the news for this. So it's requiring that skill to be more pervasive in the organization. The other thing I like to say is I came up through the business on the digital marketing side, and we used to call ourselves specialists, and we were specialists. I'm not looking for specialists anymore. I'm looking for multidisciplinary marketers. So yes, we do have some specialists, but in general, it's not okay to just specialize in one thing anymore, because that journey has become so complicated. And frankly, we can't afford to hire all those specialists. We have to have people that can work seamlessly across multi-disciplines. So that's been a big change, because it's a different, more difficult to attract and retain person, but that's how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's just, you know, we've been set up, structured quite traditionally, you know, PR, brand marketing, an e-commerce team, et cetera. And for us now, as we're sort of looking at personalization and managing segments and looking at the journey map, you know, how should those, from a journey mapping perspective or a customer experience perspective, where should they sit? Should they sit across segments? Do you have segment owners? And then there's a multitude of questions. And then especially with Adobe, we're just about to implement our Adobe campaign, which allows for omni-channel messaging across multiple platforms. Well, where does that sit? How do we work with revenue management? And then, of course, digital ventures. It just becomes very murky. To your answer, everybody sort of needs to be involved. And how do you align yourselves so that you can best optimize the structure?
Yeah.
It's just not easy.
And for us, it's also not sort of, and looking outside our walls, I mentioned it before, our agency ecosystem is quite big, and I want to make sure I'm getting the best out of them and having that work seamlessly, and even inter-agency. So companies like ours will have multiple agencies that support us, and making sure they operate in a seamless and unsiloed way is new. So it's not that, again, everybody communicated, everybody is, you know, collaborative, but it's very different than acting as one team and having the shared common goal. And so even within agency holding companies where you might be affiliated as we are with multiple agencies within a holding company, even that is an area to probe and say, are we really getting the most out of that relationship? And we looked across that and sort of made some changes. So I think there's no shortage of places you can optimize the structure. And then it really applies to your business uniquely. I'm not one who thinks there's one way to do it. Depends on your business, where it starts and where you're going. And your business would be very different than ours. So.
We've talked a little bit about how the role of the CMO has evolved over the last 10 years, much more focused on data, on technology. if you had to pull out your crystal ball and make a prediction around what the CMO 10 years from now would look like, what are the different skill sets? How has the role changed? What would your answer be?
I mean, for us, it's that merging of sales and fulfillment with demand creation. And I don't, it's not to say you don't need sales, you don't need marketing, but where those pieces come together are going to be very different. And right now there are walls and silos. And so I think those will dissolve, but I'm not sure how, but I don't see how you can separate those things in the future.
I mean, if I had to say one thing, I could imagine 10 years from now that the marketing department is going to be 50% data scientists. I think most of it's going to be AI. They're going to be churning out programs and results quicker than we can even imagine today by just being able to leverage the data that we have. And so, 10 years ago, would I think that I'm going to have, a ton of data scientists in marketing? Probably not. But I absolutely see that that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and there's a shortage of them today. So
That's what all your kids should be going to school for.
I
Anybody
say
thinking about
that.
college?
I tell my kids that. Yeah.
That's what
takeaway.
That's right.
That's
right.
Comp sci, everyone.
That's right.
Any other questions out there? Tarun?
If all of us get the nirvana of personalization and one-to-one and using all these tools, how do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors? So, because it's not only just about marketing and getting the right thing to the right person, how do we maintain our MGM brand or our Kellogg brand as a very different brand?
In product innovation and really understanding consumer needs at a behavioral level, I think is going to be the differentiator. And then bringing those products to market in a quick cycle. I mean, the consumer is expecting it. We've been, trained to understand, like you're saying, your app release. I mean, to think that you're even in the app development business, which of course you are. So I think it's product innovation really, and that deep understanding of the consumer.
I would harness just because of the business we're in. I mean, when you just think about this, go up and down the strip, everybody's got fabulous rooms. Everybody has fabulous casinos. Everybody has celebrity chef restaurants. So for us, at the end of the day, personalization aside, it really is about the guest experience. And we make it very clear that our role is to wow every guest that walks through our door. And so it's hard because these places are big monsters. They have 5,000 rooms. We have 30,000 people walking through our property every day. And so it's hard to be consistent, but that's our goal. We want to make sure that everybody has the best experience possible. So if we worked hard leveraging personalization to get you to one of our resorts and hotels, then we better do a really good job of making sure you're happy while you're here.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting in sort of the post-purchase experience. I think many companies are not that evolved and just as a consumer and experiencing airfare and travel, et cetera, hotels. It's rare that I get a survey to say, well, I mean, sometimes I do, but what's really happening there? Was I really happy? If I'm a top customer on an airline, am I really happy every time I fly? You can guess the answer to that question. So I think the more companies focus on that total experience and really measuring after the fact, because I think they spend so much getting you there, and then and post-purchase is something we want to make sure that we're making people happy. Did you really enjoy what you had? Was that experience? No matter what it is.
Yeah. So given that we're at Adobe Summit, I want to just close with one final question on the world of marketing, experience tech, ad tech, sort of that whole landscape. Is there one big thing that you think people really need to keep in mind as they continue to scale their capabilities around experience technology? One big lesson learned or thought for the future?
Make your CIO your best friend.
Right.
It's true. It's
I'll build on that because I came out of the healthcare space. It's procurement, it's regulatory, it's legal. You can't make these experiences without, it's a team sport, and involving people out. There's so many times I hear, oh, don't bring them in, they'll slow it down. Well, actually they speed it up, because having that approach and really getting input early on, if you build something and it doesn't meet other requirements, you're just going to start over. So that sort of, people laugh when I say, like, let's get our procurement team, let's get our lawyers involved in these ideation sessions. They're like, really? Yes, let's get them in there and get that feedback so that we can build more quickly.
So I'm taking away so many brilliant insights from the conversation. Thank you. if I step back from it, what's interesting, I'll take the from to analogy. To me, this is a story of moving from a world where we talk about customer centricity to a world where we really enable customer centricity at scale and really exceed people's expectations on what that can really mean by breaking down all the silos, by creating more of that communal strategy, operational, analytical mindset that crosses all the different parts of our organization and really challenges how we think, how we work together, how we measure success, and how we build that future. And I can't thank both of you enough for the insights you've shared. Gail, Lily, thank you so much.
you.
Thank you to all of you.
Thank you.